Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of O&A. My name is Tony. I sell crack to journalists. So, a couple of bit of housekeeping things just before we kick off today. They asked me to say that all positive comments about this talk go on Twitter with the hashtag awesome. All negative comments about this talk go on Google+. That joke was dedicated to Professor Jeff Jarvis. They only get worse from here. So I want to talk to you guys about 3 things today. I want to talk to you, give a kind of brief state of the union about the kind of metrics that matter. I want to talk to you about, even when you know the metrics that matter, you probably shouldn't pay journalists on them. And why none of that really matters unless we can fix some of the kind of fundamental underpinnings of our industry. And I just want to say, by the way, because I've been coming to O&A for years, and I'm really, really thankful for the opportunity to talk to you guys, because I realize that someone like me doesn't normally do this. And so I hugely appreciate the faith, and especially because we're dealing with metrics. And we have a kind of complicated relationship with metrics in the newsroom. You know, for journalists, it often feels like there's a choice between doing the things for the metrics and doing the things for the mission. And for their bosses, sometimes the simplest, most logical metrics that make so much sense somehow just backfire in ways you couldn't even imagine. But here's the thing, you guys are not alone in this. This happens to mission-based businesses quite a lot. In the 1990s, US hospitals decided they wanted to try and find a metric that worked, that held them accountable. And they chose mortality rate. I mean, what better way for a hospital to judge how well it's doing than how many people are dying? Trouble was, the fastest way to improve your mortality rate percentages was to stop admitting the sickest patients. It was to stop doing the experimental surgeries, taking risks. Even though they had this simple, direct metric that seemed to perfectly align with their mission, it ended up backfiring. And the same thing kind of happens to us when we think about chasing traffic as our goal. Because here's the thing about chasing traffic. It doesn't matter whether you have a paywall site, whether you're running events, whether you're selling premium advertising. You're not monetizing random, indiscriminate traffic with that. You're monetizing an audience. And an audience are people who know who you are, like what you do, and come back. And that's very, very different. And it involves thinking very, very differently about the data that we look at. It's a new prism for this data. Because we're not just after their index fingers, we're after their minds. Now, this may not seem like a big change, but I promise you it is. So some examples in this front. And by the way, I used some of this data for this first thing in my Time article in March. How many people actually saw that thing? Thank God for that. OK, great. It's all brand new data. So when we look at the number of page views out there in the world, 55% of them, 55% of the clicks that the web is getting on media sites are getting less than 15 seconds of attention. You've got 55% of your stuff you can just kick out straight away. That's skewing the signal somewhat. But this actually gets much, much more interesting when you dive deep into the data. So what we looked at 2 billion page views across 580,000 articles across 2,000 sites. And we pulled out the most clicked on topics, the things that did the best. And if we just cared about people's index fingers, we would have stayed there. But then what we did was we separated them out into things that were topics that were most clicked on and most read, and topics that were most clicked on and least read. And my God, it restores your faith in humanity. that, you know? You get that hit, certain kind of very brightly colored dashboards start going haywire, and you're like, Sally, it's just a short hit. What might actually be much, much more interesting to you is that second referrer, the referrer that isn't quite as exciting, but it's delivering you an audience that has a greater propensity to return. And these are the key words, propensity to return, because the good thing about referrers, traffic sources, the provocative headline that you wrote, but to look at how we can people can come back, how we can convert them to coming back again, and then ideally, how we can convert them to direct, to homepage. Because as much as we bitch about the homepage, it's still an incredibly powerful source of traffic and driver of conversion for you. You get someone to come to your homepage, they're going to come back twice as often, they're going to read 3 times as much. By the way, what we tend to see is a pretty bimodal distribution in terms of homepage traffic and external traffic. For like half of sites, you get about 80% of your traffic coming from the homepage, 20% through external. The other half, the complete opposite. Not a tremendous amount in the middle, which is kind of interesting. There's of course a challenge with homepage, and what gives ammunition to the people who say the homepage is dead is that people on mobile just don't go to your homepage. And this is a problem because mobile is the fastest growing source of traffic. In fact, you can effectively say that mobile traffic to know about mobile is that mobile is not zero sum with desktop. Yes, your homepage traffic may be going down a little bit, it may be declining, we don't know, for you guys in particular. But in general, percentages, if you've got 50% of mobile traffic, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're seeing a decline in desktop. And what we see here, this is a graph showing mobile versus desktop. the amount of traffic, the percentage of traffic that you can persuade to go on to the next page. This is not people who go from your home page to an article page. They have to have read something, consumed something that they like, and decide that they want more. This is one of the two golden metrics, one of the two key leading indicators of propensity to return. Now, the simplest way, and I want to say this out first, before we get to like tips and tricks and so forth, the simplest way to improve your recirculation is simply to write something good enough that people want to read more. Let's not forget that. Let's assume, however, that everyone here is doing that. We're the best of the best. It's all great. So when you're thinking about improving recirculation, don't just rely on the right rail, okay? Think about where the attention is focused. It's focused inline. You can put inline links in there. Also, focus on this in terms of your scroll depth. Look at where people are starting to bail. Are you giving them somewhere to go at that point? Or are you just letting them do whatever? Thinking about these kinds of things can make a real difference. Also, by the way, if you're friends with your product people, there's a few fairly simple hacks that can get you 80% of the way there with 20% of the effort. Think about the referral sources. If someone is coming from social, they're probably interested in the milieu of the moment. They care about what's happening broadly. So in your right rail, with your links, try putting in other trending stories. They don't have to be related. However, if someone's coming in from search, it's highly likely that they're interested in a specific topic. That's when you can leverage your archive. You can start to think about these things as part of a deeper story. And these things can be remarkably powerful. Now, the challenge with all of this is that whilst recirculation is incredibly powerful, it doesn't work on mobile, really. And if you think about it, this makes complete sense. Because if most of our mobile traffic is social, then what we're seeing is that, quite frankly, important. There is a direct correlation between sharing and traffic. How could there not be? It is highly unlikely that the act of you sharing something would make someone less likely to click on it, unless possibly your peers, Morgan. However, sorry, that was unfair. However, what you can say is that there is no relationship whatsoever between the amount of shares that people get, that an article gets, and the amount that it is read, the average amount of engaged time that an article gets. There's simply no relationship whatsoever. It's like whack-a-mole. When we saw this with Google with the Panda update, which wiped out a lot of the content farms. And now Facebook has actually done something similar to their algorithm. They've added something to their algorithm. Because they were getting annoyed, quite frankly, about some of the clickbait they were seeing, where the promise of the headline was not being fulfilled by the content behind it. It turns out that video wasn't changing your life in 3 minutes. And so what Facebook did, particularly on mobile, is they started looking at the amount of time that you spend once you click through from a story, click through onto a story. If you click onto a story and then immediately bail, they are now demoting that in the feed. If you're clicking through and spending a decent amount of time, then they're promoting it in the feed. So now it's not just about social shares and likes and so forth. And by the way, there was another thing 2 weeks ago. People found out that if you put the word congratulations in the comments, it would get shared more. I think they're clamping down on that one pretty fast. But yeah, if you want your content to do well on Facebook, and we've just seen Facebook is dominant versus Twitter, and social is dominant on mobile. So if you want to do these things, then you have to be thinking about the amount of time that you get, not just the kind of headline that you write when you're doing this. So here's an interesting thing, though, is these kind of two key leading indicators of propensity to return that we've been talking about: recirculation and engaged time. They're what we call balanced metrics, in that if you start trying to abuse one of them, the other one starts to drop. If you start going crazy with slideshows because you think that's the thing that's going to get you your recirculation, your engaged time will drop like a stone. So the thing to do, and a good general rule of thumb with metrics, is to try and find balanced metrics where both go up when you're doing it right, not when you're abusing one or the other. So if we have all of these wonderful metrics, and we get this idea, and our goal is there, it's there to build an audience and so forth, it is so very, very tempting for people who run news organizations to want to be able to tie that to pay, incentive programs, and so forth. It makes a wonderful sense. You know, this is how I incentivize people, surely. We saw this with the Oregonians' leaked deck on what they were doing. I would encourage you not to do this. 2001, the Atlanta school system brought in a new superintendent called Beverly Hall, and she introduced pay for performance for teachers. Teachers were now paid based upon the test results of their students. And my God, the transformation was amazing. The Atlanta school system, which had been one of the worst, started to greatly improve at a far faster rate than anyone else. So much so that by 2009, Beverly Hall was named National Schools Administrator of the Year. an incredible performance, only slightly marred by the fact that 4 years later, she and 16 others were indicted on racketeering charges for the largest cheating scandal in school's history. It turns out that teachers had been holding cheating parties in the basement where they would rewrite the tests. And this tells you two things, really. One, if you're putting in place an incentive system that can be gamed by the people being judged by that incentive system, it will be gamed. But secondly, and there's 30 years of sociological research to back this up, incentive plans work just fine if you want more quantity. If you're working in a machine shop and you want someone to stamp out more things, incentive plans work great. What they do tend to diminish is quality and creativity. Because if you have a quota, then you do what worked yesterday. It's too scary to try something new, to try something different that might not work, because you have to hit that quota. What also happens is that intrinsic motivation tends to decrease. And here's the thing that's important. Metrics are important. They're just not the only thing that's important. And that's what these incentive plans tend to create an imbalance around that. Instead of seeing metrics as a feedback loop, as a guide, people see them as a cudgel. They start to resent them, not rely on them. So if you're really thinking about how to best use metrics in your newsroom, don't imagine that journalists have to be compelled to create. Don't imagine that journalists have to be compelled to want to get their stuff in front of people. Trust me, I know they like that. Instead, trust their innate desire to do a good job, give them the right metrics in the right way, and don't abrogate management to data. Rant over. So, if we have our metrics all working perfectly, if we're optimizing the hell out of everything, if we have an engaged journalism team, there is still a challenge for us in that even if we're the very best, we can't look out into the future and say, you know what? We think journalism is in a pretty good place. There's a random poll. How many people right now would suggest to their children that they get into a journalism career because it's looking so good in the next 20 years? Jeff Jarvis, great. Thank you, Jeff. Your optimism is a wonderful thing, and I love you for it. The rest of you, I mean, like, think about this. It's kind of tough. And it's strange as well, because it shouldn't be like this. I mean, if you were to talk about an industry that's seen the largest growth of audience in its entire history, where it's found new and amazing ways to interact and tell stories, you'd think it should be a golden age. And yet it's not. And the problem here is that, in large part, and by the way, I'm going to talk about the business side now. And I know, as I said, I've been to this conference for many, many years now. This is my South by Southwest. You are my people, and I love you. But we don't talk about the business side at all. The number of panels you would count on the hand of a very clumsy butcher. It's not a bad gag. And so I want to talk about this, because it's just not good enough for us as journalists to be curious about everything in the world except how we're funded. And the truth of the matter is this: we don't monetize content at all. We monetize the links to content. Once I've hit that link and the page loads, the monetizable act has occurred. Whether I read that content or not, whether I like it or loathe it, makes no difference. In fact, if you're thinking purely short-term, the most economically rational strategy for publishing in this world is to create an incredibly provocative headline, which leads only to a page with another incredibly provocative headline, and so forth. Any investment in quality or content at all is a departure from the optimal economic strategy. This is why the New York Times can see a 30x growth in their audience, can have Pulitzers coming out the yin-yang and still have to sell their own building. This is why sites like The Guardian, who are right here, have to deal with the agency trading desk saying, you know what? I can find that Guardian audience on ferrets.com for 1/10 of the price. Because we're living in a world of infinite inventory where the marginal cost of additional inventory is effectively zero. I can take an article, I can paginate that, or I can add slideshow technology, and suddenly I've made huge increases in my inventory. And in that world, prices always trend towards zero. That is our challenge. So what are we trying to do about it? We've largely been trying to ignore that problem and find different ways of getting around it, which, by the way, are often very good strategies. So let's talk about paywalls for a second. Paywalls have been going up everywhere. I haven't seen as many walls go up since the Romans decided they didn't like the Scots. And here's the thing about them, though, because they seem to promise so much. It's direct revenue from our customers. The Chicago Tribune, I was visiting their newsroom yesterday, and by the way, if you haven't been, just go into the lobby. That is the most awe-inspiring lobby I've ever seen in my entire life. Everything's etched into the stone. It's crazy. But they're trying a paywall strategy. Then they've had some good things come from it. They've been able to remove a whole bunch of the ads, going from 11 ads to 4 ads. They made a more beautiful site. These are all good things. The challenge with paywalls is this. For an average paywall, about 3 to 4% of people will actually even see the paywall. Of those 3 to 4%, 0.5% will actually convert to paid. That means if you have 100,000 people coming to your site in a month, 17 of them will convert. This will pay for your coffee. Maybe. You guys are journalists. If you look at the kind of success stories actually around paywalls, I consider the two kind of outstanding ones to be the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal. And what's interesting about those two sites is that both of them do financial news, which means someone who's a reader can probably persuade someone else to pay for it. And two, it's the only kind of news that people are incentivized not to share. It's the stuff that people don't want out there. So paywalls make tremendous sense. We should just be careful about applying those lessons to other people. So I'm not saying, by the way, that direct subscriptions online are not a good way to pull in revenue. We've seen from the New York Times that you can get money in that way. I'm just saying if we think they're the answer for everything, we're wrong. So then we've got a whole group of people who are saying, you know what? It's format. We just need to change the format of our advertising. Native. Native is the future. And I'm not going to get into the ethics of that because, my God, that could be a panel in and of itself. And I'm utterly, utterly conflicted about it. But it makes a kind of tempting sense, doesn't it? And we hear about BuzzFeed doing incredibly well. We hear that 70% of global mobile advertising revenue is native. People tend to forget that when they say that, by the way, that 70% is 3 companies. It's Google, Facebook, Twitter. Coming up with them is Pandora. And the challenge of native is twofold, really. And if you leave aside the ethics, you've got one key question, which is, does it work? So on an average page of content, about 1/3 of people will bail on that piece of content before they've scrolled a single pixel. I know that is depressing, but it's true. On native, 2/3 of people will bail before they scroll a single pixel down the page. Of the 1/3 that remain, only 1/3 of those will make it past the first third of the page. So we can ask ourselves, and we can get into a tussle about the ethics of native. My problem is most of it just doesn't work. Now, there are examples of it working, but they tend to be few and far between. And it's important to note as well that when we have people like BuzzFeed who have made a living off native, they're not a publisher with a single editorial voice. They're a platform where a whole bunch of people are able to put their content up there. It's expected that you get multiple voices. And they trade that singular editorial voice for the ability to do this. It doesn't necessarily mean that all newspapers will be able to do this. So then we have the other possibility, which is video. My God, video. You've got scarcity, which is key. You've got high CPMs. When you've got a $7 CPM for digital advertising, you've got a $30 CPM for video. We should all just be making videos. And by the way, if you can do this, then great. Here is the challenge, though, with this, which is a lot of the time when publishers talk about video, it's a little bit like the Olympic weightlifter who's realized that all the money is in sprinting. The training seems similar. It seems like the skills are transferable. But are you really going to beat the kids who've been sprinting all this time? And here's the thing with this as well, with video, much as I love it. It doesn't solve the problem of how we pay for text journalism. Because you know what? It may well save publishing companies. But to be honest, I don't really care about publishing companies. I care about journalism. That's the thing that I want to see around in the future. And that's the problem that we have to solve for. Not through bait and switch or trying to transform ourselves into something else. And so to do that, we have to think a bit differently. Well, that's the end of my downer second act, by the way. And doing this, though, we have to start thinking about addressing the core problems that we face. And the core problem that we face is that we are, and will for the foreseeable future, be a business which is paid for by advertising. And that advertising has infinite inventory where price has no relation to the quality of content. So that's the thing we need to solve. We need a unit of scarcity, an economy based upon scarcity, and impressions aren't it. So it turns out there is one unit of scarcity, the only unit of scarcity on the web, and that is people's time and attention. It is zero sum. If I'm spending 5 minutes on The Guardian, I'm not spending 5 minutes on the New York Times. Mark Zuckerberg can add a box to Facebook and add 1 billion new impressions to the web. He cannot add a 25th hour to someone's day. It also tends to nicely correlate with quality, not with impact. What I told you before about a visitor's default behavior is to leave, think about what's behind that. When you're holding someone's attention for even a few seconds, you're competing with the entire sum of human knowledge and every form of entertainment known to man. You guys should be so impressed with what you do every day. Can you believe it? So if you're trying to hold someone, if you're trying to capture a portion of that 24 hours, you've got to be doing something right. The data bears this out, by the way. Drops off a cliff. And this is just the Now, I have no idea what the time is or how long I have taken because there's no clock and I have no watch. Do we have time for questions for people to call bullshit? 15 minutes? Awesome. Okay. Who wants to debate with me about Facebook? Jeff, straight in. This is where we talk about service journalism,
I could have this discussion on Google+, but you're not smart enough to be there.
Yeah, but then apparently no one is.
Oh.
We do this a lot.
I'm no ghost. God's work, Tony Haile, to find ways to support quality and metrics and models around that, and to move us past the importation of our old mass media metrics of reach and frequency become unique users and page views. So I love all that. I love that you've gotten the FT to play in this game, and that proves a lot. My question is, how long is it going to take advertisers whose whole structure is to build masses to rethink around these ideas?
It's a very good question. Not the question you normally ask, so that's great as well.
I'm full of surprises.
So if you'd asked me like at the beginning of this year, I'd have said frickin' ages. But, sorry, I'm British, I swear a lot. I'm trying to tamp it down. 3 things have happened this year that have been interesting. The first one was that, and this is kind of inside baseball for a lot of advertising, but the Media Ratings Council, which is the council that governs currencies, finally agreed upon something called a viewability standard in March. What that meant was that ads had to be in the viewable part of the window 50% for 1 second. Made a binary difference. So ads that weren't seen were no longer going to be valued. And what that did for the very first time was make a quantitative difference between 2 different ad placements on the same page. And of course, as soon as that happened, the brands and the ad agencies were saying, I don't just want 1 second, I want 5 seconds, I want 10 seconds, because they always want more. So there was that first key change. The second thing has been the rise of content marketing. And one of the challenges with content marketing is as soon as all the brands got into it, they realized that they could game the metrics they were using. They could game page use from buying it through Outbrain and Taboola. And they also realized, by the way, that this was kind of happening on native advertising. This is one of the things that you hear. By the way, there have been several people who've stood up on stage, not here, but in other conferences, who said, you know what? Our native advertising outperforms our editorial content. To which I say 2 things. 1, fire your editorial team. 2, it may well be outperforming because you're doing it on metrics that you're also buying. This is the open secret of native advertising right now. Everyone is buying traffic. They're buying it from Facebook, they're buying it from Taboola, they're buying it from Outbrain. This is just the fact of the matter. But with content marketing, there was this increasing idea that we want time, because that feels like the one thing they couldn't game. And the third thing has been, quite frankly, that everyone has got kind of pissed off with the digital world and fraud and a lack of trust. You've seen the big media buying agencies saying we're not going to buy on the open exchanges anymore, we're going to buy private marketplaces, or we're going to do direct deals. This is about trust as well. So with those 3 things, they've actually made me much more encouraged. Have no doubt, this is a long road to hoe. It's been a brutally long road for me thus far on this front. I've been talking about this for ages. But we're seeing much, much greater change than we ever saw before, and it's happening at a faster rate than I thought. No promises, but I'm much more encouraged. Sorry, yes.
Farrah Warner from AOL Tech. So hey. I'm the editorial director over TechCrunch and Engadget, and we love Chartbeat at those places. And I have to say thank you, because I walked in here not knowing, and this has honestly been the best session that I've been in.
Thank you.
So I have a question for you. When you were talking about the FT and the idea of buying time versus buying impressions or buying clicks, that the advertiser wants to buy that, it sort of took me back to my past when I worked at the Wall Street Journal as a writer, and we used to always be so proud of the fact that people spent time with the journal. We could, you know, they would read it for an hour and a half, as opposed to most newspapers, which were read for maybe 20 minutes. So it seems to me that we're kind of going back to the future. And how did we lose sight of the idea that engagement and sticking with something was more important than clicking? Did we do that as digital publishers? Did we put ourselves in this position by selling that to advertisers?
So that's great. So yeah, like, in fact, this is the way that we've traditionally priced media. You know, TV, radio, 30-second spots worth more than a 15-second spot and so forth. So there's very much that. What happened, by the way, do people know how we got the impression and click-through rate? It wasn't a body coming together and deciding on the best potential metrics for the web. It was two guys. A guy called Andrew Anker, who was the GM of Hotwire at the time, back in 1994, is about to put the first ad on the web. And the ad is, I think it's AT&T. And it's all black background, then tie-dyed all caps letters. Have you ever clicked here before? Arrow, you will. That is the kind of the Adam of the online advertising world. And they had no idea how to measure it. And so Andrew was a magazine guy. He sold stuff on impressions. Hotwired was close to Wired. It's like, OK, just sell on impressions. And this guy, Ken McCarthy, whose previous job, I shit you not, was teaching spam mail tactics to real estate guys, said, hey, what about this click-through rate idea I've had? And literally, two guys in a rush to get an RFP out the door came up with these metrics, and we just kind of took them. So why haven't we thought about time before this in this kind of context? And the problem is, in part, is that time has been traditionally this incredibly inaccurate measurement. The way that we have traditionally looked at time on the web is when you come to a page loads, you get a timestamp, boom, 12 o'clock. If you go onto another page, you get a second timestamp, 12:01, count between the two. How many people here have more than one browser tab open on their desktops? How many people here have ever been distracted and gone off to get a coffee and left their computer open? Okay. How many people just don't go onto another page? Don't have to put your hands up for that one. And for all of these reasons, it made time this incredibly inaccurate thing. And this was actually one of the things that us and a bunch of other people have had to deal with. And you know, I was hearing about from Tackers over here, who's been implementing his own thing at The Guardian. We had to find new ways of understanding time in a way that was accurate. And so actually, we had to do with thousands of people through lab studies. And what we found was this, is that if you start pinging people every few seconds, and you ask them a question every second, you can start to get a closer idea of this. So what we found is that the mean is every 1.1 seconds. Someone will, every 1.1 seconds, they will make some kind of human-computer interaction. They will move their mouse, they will scroll, they will tap a key, they'll do something to suggest that they're alive and they have a pulse. For 95% of people, 95% of the time, it'll happen within 4.8 seconds. So now these kind of modern ideas of how to calculate time are around every single second saying, hey, is this person here? What are they looking at? And have we heard from them in the last 5 seconds? If so, increment yes. So now the big change here is that we have actual accurate technology around this. And that's kind of cool. So that's a kind of long-winded answer, including a history of advertising. But time, we couldn't do time, now we can do time. It's the beginning of something.
Hey, Tony. Lindsay from Maclean's Magazine in Canada.
I follow you on Twitter.
Pardon me?
I follow you on Twitter.
Oh, great. I follow you on Twitter. Probably the ratio in the room is more that. I have a question about, I'm trying to think how to frame it, and I'll say the nature versus nurture idea of Facebook readers and Twitter readers. And I think we're all really drawn to the idea that these are sort of distinct subgroups with their own cultures and customs, and we can treat them in particular ways. But I'm wondering, in your experience or in your theories, to what extent that's people who exhibit certain behaviors or web-based sort of ideas kind of glomming onto particular networks because it supports that way of surfing or that way of absorbing content, or those networks, those social networks, shaping the use through their design, through their UX. Like, I'm just curious what your take on that and what the implications are in our chase for that endless referral traffic.
It's kind of a chicken and the egg thing, because if they're already on the network, they're exhibiting behaviors, you can't really tell the stuff before. What I will say is this, which is, as I showed before, if mobile traffic is predominantly social, if mobile traffic is going to be, in large part, the major growth engine for us, then the idea of two algorithms ruling what gets promoted and what gets distributed is profoundly worrying to me. Which is why, I don't know if Vivian's here, and I'm going to see her later, so she may beat me up over the, hi, don't beat me up later. Why, when I hear about the Twitter algorithm, it's something which I think we should be debating much, much more. I can completely understand the desire for it. I can understand how it could, in many ways, make for a better user experience. But we saw with the Ice Bucket Challenge in Ferguson just how different these things can work. And Twitter was so, so important to me then because Ferguson got into my soul. That's an important thing. So if we're talking about behaviors for users, it's not so much the different groups of users that we want to think about. It's what can these two things do, and how do we make two algorithms do, and how do we make sure that we have one unadulterated feed that can really get out there and do something? Sorry. Yeah. I don't know how much time we have left, by the way, but let's go for it.
Hi, I'm Bill Cannon. I'm with Gannett's Indiana Media Group. And this question actually comes via Twitter through me to you from a colleague in Louisville. And you had mentioned, readers trust their social feed more than journalists to decide what's best for them.
On mobile.
On mobile, correct. So what he wanted to know is, to that extent, how do they perceive news placed by journalists into their feed? And are they more likely to trust the journalists they know in that feed? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm always very wary about going beyond the data because I'm a data guy, and that is an element of speculation for me. And I just want to be clear on this front, by the way. With mobile, recirculation being low, it suggests that people are consistently going back to the feed to look for their next bit of content. That is an inference we can draw. It's very, very tempting to draw multiple inferences from data, to go much, much further than the data will support, because we're creative people. We like to put stories together. Be careful of that. Think about what the data really says, and try not to go beyond that. I would definitely be going beyond that, and as tempting as it is, when I have this huge audience to do so, I'm not gonna. Okay.
Fair enough.
Guys, thank you so much. This was wonderful. Thank you.